Greetings, my name is Lisa. I'm 33 years old and recently went through a divorce. My journey with Andrew, my now ex-husband, began in my first year of college, while he was a sophomore. From the moment we met, I felt he was my soulmate. After completing our education, we devoted ourselves to our careers, saving diligently to afford a comfortable home. 6 years of dating led us to marriage, and soon after, we bought our first apartment together. We were eager to start a family, but after 5 months of unsuccessful attempts, medical tests revealed that I couldn't conceive. The news shattered me, but Andrew stood by my side, offering unwavering support. His sister-in-law also provided comfort during this challenging time. Despite the initial heartbreak, Andrew and I gradually found solace in the freedom and financial flexibility that came with not having children. 3 years into our marriage, we decided to host the holiday gathering, as my parents were away on a cruise. Andrew's family, excluding his parents who were briefly stopping by before a road trip, joined us. This included Andrew's brother Jacob, his wife Melissa, and their 4 children. Jacob and Melissa, already parents to 2, faced financial struggles, yet they had 2 more kids. I couldn't understand their decision, but kept my thoughts to myself. During the holidays, Jacob and Melissa approached us with a request. They hoped to turn our holiday gathering into a week-long staycation for their family, citing financial constraints that prevented them from affording a traditional vacation. They reassured us it would be a simple, budget-friendly way to give their kids a holiday experience. Given our apartment's setup with many fragile items and a lack of childproofing, I was hesitant about the idea, worried about the potential chaos and damage. Navigating through a week with Jacob and Melissa's kids in our home wasn't something I was looking forward to, especially with my extensive collection of unique and valuable items displayed throughout our living space. These items, which I cherished, were now at risk with the influx of energetic children. Reluctantly, I agreed to their stay, emphasizing the importance of accountability for any damages. Jacob promised their children would behave, a promise I hoped he could keep. Our house, filled with collectibles and delicate decor, had no spare storage to safeguard these treasures from the lively atmosphere a family of 6 would undoubtedly bring. The pressure from Melissa and Andrew, combined with Jacob's desperate plea, left me feeling cornered into agreeing. This decision didn't sit well with Andrew. He was visibly upset by my initial reluctance, accusing me of being materialistic and lacking family values. His cold silence following the conversation only added to the tension. When I extended my apology to ease the friction between us, Andrew assured me the holiday season would be joyous. However, the reality was far from it. The children's unruly behavior tested my patience to its limits, with Jacob and Melissa seemingly uninterested in managing their offspring. Their negligence forced me to shoulder the responsibility of supervising their energetic antics, further straining my relationship with Andrew. Christmas offered a brief respite, courtesy of Andrew's parents, who entertained the children for a few hours. But by New Year's, I was utterly spent, eagerly anticipating the end of their visit. My fatigue eventually culminated in an outburst, larger than intended, sparked by an incident that perfectly encapsulated the chaos of their stay. One afternoon, while the adults rested and I was left to manage the children, a momentary lapse, stepping away to wash my hands after changing a diaper, led to disaster. In just those few minutes, the other children seized the opportunity to explore, their curiosity drawing them to a showcase filled with my prized trinkets. The potential for damage was immense, a nightmare scenario I had feared from the start. This incident was a stark reminder of the challenges and pressures that came with balancing family obligations and personal boundaries. The incident escalated quickly from a quiet afternoon to a full-blown catastrophe. Our TV stand, which also showcased many of my treasured trinkets, became the center of chaos. In an attempt to play, the children threw the trinkets aside and, alarmingly, one of them started using one to strike the TV screen, causing noticeable damage. The noise brought me running, and the scene that unfolded was heartbreakingly chaotic. The commotion was enough to rouse everyone from their naps, and they were met with disarray and damaged possessions. My reaction was immediate and intense, fueled by frustration and disbelief at the extent of the damage. Despite attempts to downplay the situation, labeling it as minor mischief, I couldn't contain my anger. The situation spiraled as Melissa and I exchanged harsh words, culminating in a deeply hurtful comment about my infertility. This personal attack, especially considering its sensitive nature, left me devastated and resolved to demand their departure. Andrew's reaction, siding against me in the aftermath, didn't deter my resolve. I knew my stance was justified, especially since the care and discipline of the children had largely fallen to me during their visit. My New Year's was spent away from the chaos, finding solace with my friend Karen, who offered much-needed support. In the aftermath, Andrew and I reached an understanding, albeit a strained one. I insisted on compensation for the damages, a demand Andrew couldn't refute given the circumstances. Despite the significant cost of the damages, I chose to request only half from Jacob and Melissa, acknowledging their financial hardships. This incident left a permanent rift, particularly between Melissa and me, one that I was adamant would not heal. Months later, Andrew brought news of Jacob's significant job promotion, hinting at a potential improvement in their financial situation and an impending move to another state. While this development promised a fresh start for them, it also closed a tumultuous chapter in our lives, leaving lingering feelings of what could have been handled differently. The proposal that Jacob floated to us was unexpected and frankly unwelcome. He suggested that Melissa and their children temporarily move in with us while he transitioned to his new job in another state, a proposition that immediately set me on edge. Given our previous experience, I couldn't fathom why Melissa couldn't manage on her own, especially with Jacob's forthcoming increase in income. Surely they could consider hiring a nanny to assist with the children. Andrew's plea for compassion struck a nerve, especially after our last tumultuous experience hosting them. I stood firm, unwilling to open our home to such chaos again, arguing that it wasn't solely my responsibility to accommodate his family's needs. Andrew's accusation of me being heartless felt unfair, particularly in light of Melissa's insensitive remarks about my infertility. His suggestion to revisit the conversation later did little to quell my frustration. Andrew's insistence perplexed me, knowing my stance on the matter, yet he pushed, equating my reluctance to a lack of familial care. Despite my offer to financially support them in finding a nanny, or even assisting them ourselves on weekends, Andrew rejected these alternatives, seemingly fixated on housing them. The ensuing argument was intense and prolonged, with Andrew deploying every tactic from emotional manipulation to outright threats. My resolve, however, remained unshaken. This issue became a significant standoff between us, one I was prepared to firmly hold my ground on. After 2 weeks of relentless discussion and tension, Andrew's demeanor inexplicably shifted. He suddenly adopted a normalcy in his interactions with me, dropping the subject entirely. This abrupt change, while relieving the immediate pressure, aroused my suspicions. The cessation of his requests and the sudden distance he maintained sparked concern over what he might be planning silently. Compelled by a nagging suspicion that Andrew was keeping secrets, I couldn't resist the urge to investigate further once he had fallen asleep. Despite knowing it was an invasion of privacy, my intuition was too strong to ignore. My initial dive into his conversations with Jacob immediately unveiled a thank you message for aiding Melissa and her children, confirming my suspicions of hidden plans. Further exploration revealed discussions with Melissa herself, where Andrew had assured her of a place in our home. Specifically, my room was to be sacrificed as a lesson for my reluctance to assist. This betrayal hit hard. Our rooms were sanctuaries filled with personal treasures, and mine doubled as my office space. The thought of relinquishing my private haven was unthinkable. Despite an initial impulse to confront Andrew on the spot, I realized such an approach would only backfire on me. I decided to strategize calmly, knowing I had a fortnight to act before Melissa's scheduled arrival. The following day marked the start of my plan. I secured a storage unit for the furniture I had single-handedly selected and purchased for our apartment. After moving in, Andrew had expressed a desire to postpone any major purchases, despite our significant savings and the acquisition of our dream apartment. This left us living in a nearly empty space, save for the essentials and a few decorative items I had acquired on my own. Tired of the lack of initiative and Andrew's moodiness whenever the topic of furnishing our home arose, I took matters into my own hands. From the sofa to the bed frame, from bookshelves to mirrors, I financed the transformation of our living space, with Andrew contributing nothing financially. Now, faced with his deception and the impending invasion of my personal space, I was prepared to act, beginning with the removal of every piece of furniture I had invested in, ensuring that Andrew would face the full impact of his decisions. I made the decision to clear out our apartment of everything I had invested in, leaving behind only what Andrew had personally paid for, which wasn't much beyond his own room's contents. Feeling a mix of betrayal and determination, I reached out to my best friend Karen to discuss the possibility of staying with her for an extended period. The situation with Andrew had escalated. He had unilaterally decided to invite his sister-in-law and her children to live with us, despite my clear objections and their previous visit, which resulted in $5,000 worth of damages. Karen, ever the supportive friend, didn't hesitate to open her home to me, excited at the prospect of extended sleepovers. Her reaction bolstered my resolve to follow through with my plan, removing my belongings and the furniture I had purchased for our apartment and storing them safely away. This wasn't just about reclaiming my possessions. It was a statement of my independence and a step towards distancing myself from a marriage that had disregarded my feelings and well-being. The next 3 weeks were a blur of activity. Quietly, I began the process of moving my items out of the apartment, careful not to alert Andrew. I also initiated the divorce proceedings, a painful but necessary step towards rebuilding my life. My plan was to leave the apartment as bare as possible, a visual representation of the void left by the absence of respect and consideration in our relationship. As D-Day approached, my anxiety peaked, not just over executing my plan, but also about starting anew. The final act was to remove the large pieces of furniture, including our couches and bed frames, ensuring that when Melissa and her children arrived, the home would reflect the stark reality of Andrew's choices. The day arrived, and I took off from work to oversee the final removal of the furniture. As the movers did their job, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that led to this moment. It was more than just leaving a physical space. It was about setting boundaries and demanding respect. Andrew lost in his decisions and failed to see the consequences until it was too late. As the movers carried away the last of my contributions to our shared life, I stepped into a future that was uncertain but finally my own. As I settled into my car, ready to head to Karen's place with my belongings, my phone rang. It was Andrew, demanding that I clear out my room for Melissa and her kids, as if our previous discussions had never happened. He insisted this was my lesson for not wanting to help with his family. Little did he know, I was already stepping ahead, having removed not just my personal items but everything I had contributed to our home. My response mirrored his own words, marking a definitive end to our shared life. Leaving Andrew, the divorce papers on the kitchen island felt like the final act of a play that had been long in the making. This was where he would find them, a symbolic place representing the routine and life I was leaving behind. I anticipated his shock would come in stages, a thought that brought me a complex mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Arriving at Karen's, the warmth of her welcome contrasted sharply with the coldness of my departure from Andrew. We busied ourselves with setting up my new space, making it as cozy as possible under the circumstances. Despite our efforts to keep the mood light and focus on the future, my mind kept wandering back to Andrew, wondering when he would discover the full extent of my actions. When Andrew's calls finally came, I resisted at first, prolonging his moment of realization. But curiosity and a need to confront the situation head-on led me to answer. His reaction to the empty house was predictable, yet it underscored the finality of my decision. I had taken everything that was mine, leaving him to face the consequences of his choices. This was not just about physical possessions, but about reclaiming my autonomy and setting a boundary he could not ignore. The path forward would be challenging, but with Karen's support and a newfound resolve, I was ready to start anew. In the aftermath of Andrew's decision to host Melissa and her kids despite my clear opposition, I found myself explaining the logic behind taking everything I had paid for from our shared home. My contributions had filled our space, and after Andrew neglected his promise to contribute, I felt justified in reclaiming what was mine. His plea, questioning what Melissa and the children would do, fell on deaf ears. My stance was clear. His actions had disrespected my boundaries, and I had warned him against inviting them over due to past damages they had caused. Andrew labeled me as cruel, yet it was he who had crossed the line, ignoring both my feelings and the chaos his sister-in-law and her children had previously brought into our lives. My offer to compromise, suggesting he could have stayed with them instead, was ignored, leading me to take decisive action. Amidst his attempts to downplay the situation, I remained firm, reminding him that everything I took was bought with my money and that the divorce papers awaited his signature. Following our conversation, Andrew's persistent calls became mere background noise, as I chose to focus on the peace and support found in Karen's company. The weight of the situation lifted off my shoulders, leaving me confident in the face of potential legal battles, thanks to our prenuptial agreement and the clear ownership of the items I had removed. Melissa's frantic messages later revealed the immediate impact of my actions. They were forced to return to her home, a move that apparently disrupted their plans and upset the children. Andrew's situation, now relegated to sleeping on Melissa's couch due to the absence of a bed at our former home, was an ironic twist that Melissa believed I should regret. Yet, her accusations missed their mark, as her attempts to shift responsibility onto us had failed. Months have passed, and my life has seen considerable improvement. Living with Karen has been a wonderful experience, so much so that we're considering making our arrangement permanent. Through it all, I've learned the value of standing firm in one's decisions, and the peace that comes with removing oneself from toxic situations. Looking back, I see this chapter as a closed book, one that ended with me finding a happier, more fulfilling path.